to be able to introduce him.
Why is that?
Well, because now I can tell all the lies about him that I've always wanted to do.
Is that why you're here?
That's right, that's why I came.
But are they true lies?
True lies.
They probably are.
The KKK sent me. And so how many of you know Charlie? I mean, yeah, everyone knows Charlie, almost everyone. I mean, we know Charlie for better or for worse. I knew Charlie. Charlie's from New Zealand, moved to Athens. I've never even heard that story. So hopefully that could be part of your story. I came to Baba in 1969, and I met you in 1960. Was it 69 or 70?
70. I first came to the center in 71, so it was when you were at Emory.
I was at Emory, and Charlie...
He had hair, too, back then.
Okay.
No,
Now,
that's too much detail.
He did, yeah. But it wasn't very good looking, that's why he shaved it.
He didn't want it anyway.
okay, I'm going to come up with... Oh, wait, we're being recorded. I have to be careful now. I forgot that. Okay.
This is an extended introduction.
This is. So why don't I...
Mutual roasting.
Why don't I move on then and say I'm holding the bucket? And it is possible to have Charlie sitting here because of this green bucket.
Yay!
So we have Charlie and the green bucket. And those are the two most important things in our life right now. So I'm going to pass this around and turn it over to Charlie.
Bucket? Okay, this is probably the first time there's been a discussion about the Ku Klux Klan here. And I'm sure there's going to be lots more, but I actually have a connection with the Ku Klux Klan, which is very weird, and I've got some stories to tell you. I'll give you a little bit brief background. I didn't grow up in America. I grew up in England. My father was from New Zealand. When he graduated from high school, he wanted to join the Royal New Zealand Air Force as a pilot, and they only had 3 planes. So they sent him to England to fly with the Royal Air Force, and there were New Zealanders there and Australians, Rhodesians, South Africans and stuff. And he got his training there as a fighter pilot, and then the war broke out. England declared war on Germany, and he flew in the Royal Air Force and stuff. Anyway, so I ended up I actually was born in America. Of the 3 children, my brother was born in Wales, my sister was born in Scotland, my father was born in... It's crazy. But anyway, I grew up in England, and this was in the 50s. I was born in 48. There weren't a lot of black people in England at that time. It was a pretty white society. And there were a few people migrating from the West Indies, so the West Indians were coming in. And they were part of the British Commonwealth and stuff. And I was put in a boarding school, a 400-year-old boarding school, at the age of 10. And it was all boys and stuff. And it was very tough and everything. We had to wear uniforms, straw hats, blah, blah, blah. I was a cadet in the Royal Navy and sailed on warships down to the Mediterranean. And it was all guys. And it was all pretty much white guys. And so, anyway, then we went to live in New Zealand for a while, and then I decided to come to America because America was where everything was happening. The civil rights movement was going on, women's rights and stuff like that, the rock and roll, the art and stuff. So I got on a freight ship and came here in '67, and ended up coming to Georgia because he was there, and that's because I wanted to meet him. John Leiter, yeah. Anyway.
How did you find Georgia?
I saw it on a map. Anyway, I ended up coming to... Just be
frigate
quiet,
ship
okay? Come on, stop it.
Is that where the frigate ship landed? Is that?
You're supposed to give me money, not talk to me like this. Anyway, I came to Athens, Georgia, which, using a political word, Athens is in Clark County. It's where the University of Georgia is. It's the smallest county in Georgia. Georgia has more counties than any other state east of the Mississippi. We have, I think, 64 counties or something.
159.
159? Okay, thank you. That's good. I was only halfway there. Anyway, it's kind of thought of as this little blue island in this deep Red Sea, and there were lots of hippies there, etc., etc. But it was still kind of weird to me in that I'd come to the land of the free and the home of the brave, where everyone is created equal and stuff. And I had to go to a doctor for some reason, and I made an appointment, and I went to the doctor. This would be here at 10 o'clock, and I went to the doctor, and the lady, I signed in, she said, go down the hallway there and to the waiting room, and the doctor will be with you in a few minutes. I said, okay, you know. So I'll go down to the hallway, and there's a sign that says coloreds only and whites only. I'm going, what? You know, I'm going, what is this? The schools in Athens had not been integrated at that time. They weren't integrated until 1970. Women who went to the University of Georgia didn't have the same rights as men. That women could not live off campus. Men could. Women had to be in the dorms by 12 o'clock. I could stay out all night and get drunk and roll around. And then also, women were not allowed to wear pants on campus. They couldn't wear jeans or shorts or anything like that. Anyway, we had this demonstration. We took over the administration building and closed the university down, and they had to come through and change the rules. So anyway, this is some of the stuff. There were hardly any black students at the University of Georgia. I think there was maybe 10%, which is pretty weird because I think Georgia has something like 2/3 or more, or half the people are black there. Football players, you know, and I think there were more football players, black football players than white football players. So anyway, it was sort of interesting to come to America and see all this stuff that I was kind of wondering why America has never had a woman president, and that women were only allowed to vote in 1926, whereas in New Zealand, they'd been voting for years. New Zealand's had, I think, 2 or 3 women presidents so far. So has India's had a woman president, Pakistan's had a woman president, England, Germany, and it just seems strange to me that, and one reason is because I grew up in this all-male society, and Baba picked me up and dropped me into a sea of women. I got married here in America, 4 daughters, no sons or anything. And I was a total idiot. You know, I thought that women were just kind of like guys, except they had these really nice chests. I thought that's really nice, you know? But I didn't have a clue. And then also one of my daughters is black. She's adopted from India, and she's very dark-skinned. And so I had to be aware of women's rights and also racial rights and stuff, because it was personal. I have a friend in Athens, Georgia, who's a Baba lover, and he's my age, and he's a good, you all know him and stuff. He has 4 white sons, and he never thinks of women's rights, and he never thinks of racial rights and stuff, because it's not personal, you know. So anyway, one story that I have is that this sort of started it out. I was back maybe in 68 or 69. I had hair down to about here, and I was in Atlanta, and I was walking down Peachtree Street, and I was feeling hungry. And I saw this Huddle House, which is a restaurant kind of thing. I thought, oh, go and get a hamburger. So I walked in there, and I sat down at the counter, and I'm sitting there kind of like, wow, this is cool, you know. And the waitress went and waited on this guy down at the other end who'd been sitting there for a while, and she went and waited on this other person who'd been sitting there a while. And after a while, I realized she was starting to serve people who came in after me. And my first reaction was, wow, this is cool. That LSD I took made me invisible. But then after a while, she walked by and I said, excuse me, ma'am, but I've been sitting here for quite a while, and you've never, you know, came up and asked me what I want and everything. She said, I'm sorry, sir, but I can't wait on you. And I went, oh, no. And I pulled out my wallet and went, oh, I got money. And she said, no, the managers told me that I can't wait on you. And I looked at her, and I said, don't worry about it. And I got up and walked out. I could have taken, she was black. The manager was white, but she was black. I could have gone back outside and taken a pair of scissors and cut my hair, walked back in. Yes, sir, what do you want? She could never have done that. There were restaurants where she couldn't go to at that time in Georgia. And if I cut my hair, I could go to anywhere. So that was sort of interesting. Let me see, I've got this sort of written down a little bit. I eventually married a lady called Trudy, who was a Bible lover, and we moved out to into what's called Walton County, which is maybe a 20-minute ride from Athens, and we farmed there. And but we were out in the country. This wasn't the little blue island in the deep Red Sea, and they were all country people. And about a mile, we were right on a river, the Appalachian River, and about half a mile up the river, there was a bridge called the Moores Ford Bridge. And it was very famous that there had been an incredibly well-known lynching there. And it was in my neighborhood. You know, we would go up there and we'd go swimming in the river at the bridge and everything like that. And we'd sort of heard this stuff about it. We didn't know what it was. But it happened in 1946. And two black couples from Walton County, where we lived, they got in an argument with somebody. And some Klansmen, the police came and arrested them. The sheriff put them in jail. The Klan came and bailed them out. And they took them down to the bridge. And like 40 or 50 people came and they tied them up and they just had target practice at them. And it went on for like half an hour or something like that, and kids were down there and stuff like that. So anyway, this was part of our neighborhood. The police came and the sheriff came, and he knew all the people who were down. Nobody got arrested. And the FBI came in. It was the first time the FBI was called in. I think Hoover at that time was the president, or whatever they call it, the head of the FBI. And he sent the FBI, and nobody would talk to the FBI. And yet it was the neighborhood. So anyway, we kind of knew that there were probably neighbors of ours who maybe their parents and stuff had been involved in this and everything. But it was part of we knew about it. So, let me see. There was another, in 1964, on the other side of Athens, on this river called the Broad River, there was another lynching. And these three black army officers, reserve army officers, one was a colonel, or he might have been a lieutenant colonel, had come down from Washington to do a week's thing in their reserve officers, and they had to go to Fort Gordon or Fort whatever for a week. And they were heading back to Washington, and they stopped in Athens for lunch. And someone came up and said, "Where are you guys from?" You know, and they said, "Oh, we're Washington." They said, "Where are you going?" They said, "We're heading back." "And which way are you going?" You know, and you know, they thought they were just having a conversation. Anyway, the guys, when they finished eating, they got in their car and started driving up through Madison County, Georgia. And when they got to the Broad River, the Klan were waiting for them, and they had sawed-off shotguns and shot at them. They killed this guy called Lemuel Penn, who was the driver. They really injured the second guy, and the third guy didn't get hurt because he was asleep in the back of the car. The men were arrested. They were boasting that they did it. This is in 1964. They were boasting that they did it. And they were arrested by the sheriff, and they were taken to the jail, and they were tried right away. All male, all white jury, of course found innocent, and they came out boasting about, and it was at that point, John maybe could help me on this because he's a lawyer, or he pretends to be a lawyer. The civil rights law or something, some law was passed in '64, and the federal government came in and arrested these guys and charged them with denying these men their civil rights. and they couldn't charge him again for murder because they'd already been found innocent. And this was the first time that the civil rights law was actually tested in court, and it was in Athens. I actually knew the lawyer who defended these guys. I was dating his daughter. And they were found guilty in this, and they were actually sent to prison, but it was only for like 5 years. I ended up knowing one of the guys, one of the murderers, and he opened a store in Athens. It was, you know, people would bring in stuff sort of to sell and stuff. And I'd go in there and pretend I was looking for stuff, and I would just kind of watch him out of the corner of my eye. I went, this guy's a murderer, you know. And so anyway, a number of years later, this was back maybe 20 years later, I'm at this place called Earth Fair, which is a store, you know. And I used to eat lunch there, and there was this man who was a little older than me, and he'd always eat lunch there. And after a while, we got to know each other. And he said, I got something I need to tell you. I said, what's that? And he said, oh, back in 1964, he lived in Athens. He said, back in 1964, some friends of mine in Madison County called me and said, hey, Dave, can you come out and help me do something? Can you do a favor for me? He said, yeah, boys. So he drove his car out there that evening, and they said, open up your trunk. And he opened up the trunk, and they put 3 sawed-off shotguns in there. And they said, keep these and don't tell anybody about it. And he went, okay. So he's driving back home, and he had the radio on, and the news came on, and they heard that these 3 men had been killed, well, shot on the Broad River, and he realized these were the murder weapons. And I said, Dave, what did you do with them? He said, I took them down to the local foundry where they melt down metals and threw them in the fire. I went, but those are murder weapons. Come on, man. He said, if I'd given them to the police, I'd be dead. So anyway, to get back to another story, it was weird to have these connections, weird to meet this guy be having dinner with him, and I hear this story, and I knew one of the murderers and stuff like that. And as far as the Morse Ford thing that was done in '46, I was in my car driving down Highway 78 in Georgia. It was like a couple of miles from my house, going to Monroe, Georgia. And I see this guy laying on the side of the road up by this fence. I go, what the heck? So I pull over and I go up and I said, are you okay? And he was an old man. And he said, I was picking blackberries and I slipped and I can't get up. And I said, here. And I helped him up and I said, where do you live? And he said, I live in the house right there. So I said, well, let me take you home and get in my car. And I said, is anyone home? And he said, well, I live with my son and he's at work. And I said, well, we can call him. So I took him up to his house and got him inside, and I got him sitting on a chair in the living room, and I went to the refrigerator and got him a cup of tea, iced tea and stuff. And I got on the phone to his son. And while I'm on the phone, I could hear this guy moaning and screaming. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. God, forgive me. God, please forgive me. Oh, I'm screwed up and blah, blah, blah. I go, what the hell? And then the son came, and he took over, and he thanked me for doing it and everything. And I walked down the driveway, and there was this mailbox with the name Pritchard on it. The Pritchards were the people who owned Morse Ford, and he was one of the guys. And he was a Klansman, and now he was getting close to dying, and he's going, what the hell have I done? You know, now I've got to be with Jesus and stuff. He was a born-again Christian. So I knew a person from the Morse Ford massacre too. So I'll go back a little bit. No, not back. Some of you know a guy called Tom Fortson. And Tom is kind of like my brother. That we hang out in India together and stuff. And he's one of the few people I hang out with that at times I feel like getting in a rickshaw and going into town and buying a gun and coming back and shooting and stuff. It drives me very crazy. No, we're really good friends. Anyways, Tom used to come to our farm often. He'd suddenly turn up, he'd sleep in the hayloft and everything like that. One day he came, and I said, Tom, I'm working on this farm about 5 miles from here. I'm putting in a fence line on this horse farm. If you want to come and help me, I can pay you, you know, because I used the help. And we can hang out together, you know, and talk bother and stuff like that. So we went there, and about 10 o'clock, this is a good story. about 10 o'clock in the morning, I said, hey, let's get in the truck and go down to the country store and eat us some coffee. So we got in the truck and we drove down, it's about a half a mile down the road, and we pull up. And there's a guy sitting outside drinking a Coke and eating a donut. And I said, oh, Tom, this is a guy I want to introduce you to. And we got out and the guy goes, hey, Charlie, how you doing, man? You're working on the Mackenzie farm, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And we walked up and I answered, this is Tom Fortson, this is Billy Couch. And I said, he owns a farm about half a mile around the corner from us. And we talked for a few minutes and I said, well, Billy, we got to get our coffee and get back to work. So we went in and got our coffee and we came out and Billy said, don't work too hard, boys, you know. We're like, okay. And we get in the truck and I point to Billy, who's still eating this thing. I said, Tom, do you know who that is? Tom goes, Billy something or other? I said, that's the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And Tom just stared at him. And I'm waiting for some feedback. How many people can introduce you to the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan? You know? And Tom just stared at him, and it seemed like eternity. It was maybe 5 seconds. And Tom went, wow, I wonder if we've even been through our Klan incarnation yet.
What?
I wonder if we've even been through our Klan incarnation yet. And my feet hit the ground, because I've been hanging out a lot with Billy Couch. And I would go and drink coffee with him in his kitchen and stuff like that, because I wanted to find out why he thought like this, you know, what was his background and everything. But I was kind of looking down on him. And when Tom said that, I went, wow, maybe I've got all that crap inside of me and it hasn't come to the surface yet. Maybe that guy could be lifetimes ahead of me. And it was really wonderful, you know. So, to get back to, this is the weirdest story. There's a place north of Atlanta, there's a loop road that goes around Atlanta called I-285. And Atlanta has expanded so much further outside of that. But there was this county, Forsyth County, and the county seat is called Cumming, Georgia. And it's right on 285 on the north side of it. And in the around 1912, there were a number of black people living in Forsyth County, but they all got kicked out, every single one of them. And there were no black people in Forsyth County or allowed to live in Forsyth County by the government. And this went on, and then in the mid-1980s, I think, I could have my, years mixed up. Hosea Williams, who was one of Martin Luther King's sort of lieutenants, decided that they would have a march, a demonstration in Cumming, Georgia, which is the county seat. And so it was a small group of people, I doubt if it was more than 20, went there, and the local people came out and threw rocks at them and screamed at them and stuff like that. And some of them got really badly injured by the rocks, and they had to run back to their cars and go back into Atlanta. So maybe a few weeks later, there was another protest planned, and it was led by Coretta Scott King, who was Martin Luther King's wife. Martin Luther King died, I think, in '69 or something like that. Excuse me. And she was going to lead the march, and we decided that we would go on this march. So Trudy and I and Brian Darnell went, which is interesting, because Brian Darnell was very Southern. And there were maybe, I'm guessing, 500 people in the march. She led the march, and she had her hands, and on each side of her was one of the Georgia United States senators. They'd come down from Washington. Anyway, once again, the streets are lined with tons of racist people. And they were yelling stuff at us and stuff like that. And one of them was this young lady, and she was carrying her little baby in her arms. He was, maybe 8 months old. And she was screaming obscenities at me, and I'm going, God, that poor woman, and that kid. So anyway, we went to that march, and we didn't get hurt or anything. I later, this is getting to the funny part, I later heard that the Klan had got a permit to have a demonstration, a big meeting in the courthouse square, town square, in the county capital, Cumming, Georgia. And it was going to be like in 2 weeks or something like that. And I thought, wow, I bet there's going to be some county demonstrators. Counter, thank you. Really glad John's here. And I thought, well, I'll go down and be one of the counter demonstrators. So I went down there, and there were probably 250 to 300 Klansmen there, and they were all in their robes and stuff. And there were maybe 250 National Guard and State Patrol separating the Klansmen in the big town square from the counter demonstrators. You know, they had guns and stuff like that. So I went over to where the counter demonstrators were, you know, and the Klan would come right up to the line of police and stuff to bait us, and the counter demonstrators were yelling stuff that, in my opinion, was far worse than the Klansmen. Excuse me, like, suck my dick, you fucking fascist pig. And I'm going, guys, come, let's sing the Beatles song, All You Need Is Love. And I said, all you need is love. And no one's joining me, and I feel like a total idiot, you know. And they were saying horrible things. And I'm going, they're no different than the Klan. So I snuck across the line into the Klan. And I just start wandering around. I got blue jeans on and a shirt and stuff like that. Like, hey guys, what's happening? You know, like that. And they all had their hoods on, but you're not allowed, I know in the state of Georgia, I don't know what it is, you can wear your hood, but you can't cover your face and stuff. And they used to have a thing with eye things cut out. And there were, as I say, 250 of them, you know. They were having a great time, you know, they were meeting each other and stuff. And I noticed this small group of people who were different, that there were maybe 5 or 6 of them, and they had black robes on. And they were talking with this guy who had this pearly pink robe. So I go, oh, what's this? So I just walk up and say, hey guys, how you doing? Where can I get these duds here? Can I buy them at Sears? And they go, you can't wear these. And I go, well, why not? I got money. And the guys in the black were the Grand Dragons. And the pearly pink guy was the Imperial Wizard who had been brought in from Mississippi. And I said, well, I really think I'd look good in that pink one there. And stuff. You know, I mean, after this meeting, could you sell it to me or something? And they look at me like, yo. And one of the Grand Dragons had slightly long hair. And I reached up and pulled him and said, you a faggot or something? Oh. And he kind of looks at me like, and they're looking at me like, this guy's totally crazy. And then they built this incredibly big stage, and it had a microphone on it. And they called the Imperial Wizard up. So he climbs up the steps onto the stage, and he grabs the mic. He's got the microphone, and he starts preaching to them. And they're all gathered around, and they're screaming and laughing, and yeah, you know. And it went on and on, well, maybe for 10 minutes. And then he finally finished, and they're all cheering like anything, and he starts walking back down to the steps. So I said, what the hell? So I just start walking up the steps. Is it okay if I say a few words? And he goes, no. By that time, I'd got to the microphone. And I folded my hands, and I said, let us pray. And everyone got quiet. And I said, we repent, O God, most merciful, for all our sins, for everything. And I said the whole of Baba's prayer of repentance. And they all were quiet, and they all said, amen. And I turned around and walked off the stage and went home. I think it's the first time Baba's prayer of repentance has ever been said at a Klan rally. Or it could be wrong. So other things that are having an Indian daughter, and she's very dark, and there's been racial prejudice against her. We got her when she was 18 months old. And there's never been prejudice against me. I'm a white guy. I'm top of the shit pile in this lifetime. And yet I've got a daughter who has gone to nature camps in Athens, Georgia, and the instructor says, I got this turtle here. Everyone gather around. Let me show you this turtle. And my daughter Pratima, oh wow. And some kid goes, pushes her in the face, and get your dirty black face out of here. That's never happened to me. but it happened to my daughter. So it's personal. We go to India, and you know, I'm her father. Do I look like her father? Hell no, you know. But people know that she's adopted, and you know, and I'm her father. And I've taken her to India quite a few times. And people come up and say, "Oh, she's from South India, huh?" And the South Indians are kind of a different race. They're Dravidians, and they're much darker. And I go, "No, actually, she's from in Nasik, you know, here in Maharashtra." And some of the people take a step backwards. Because if she's that dark and she's from Maharashtra, she's an untouchable. I've never had that happen to me. I can go to India, I can get away with all sorts of shit in India because I'm a white guy, you know. But I have this black daughter and everything like that. So, let me see. I'm looking here. It's sort of, this is the most important story. Back when I guess 6 years ago, I always try to go to India every February for Baba's birthday, and my birthday is like 3 to 4 days later after Baba's birthday. And I always have my birthday party down at the orphanage, the Pumpkin House Orphanage and stuff. And I've also, because I'm friends with Tom Fortson, Tom is one of the guys who's in charge of repairing the exterior dome of the Samadhi. And I was one of the people who was working on the dome of the Samadhi, and it was actually on my birthday. And we got down there and we had this meeting and stuff, and Tom was in charge. And they do it every 4 years or something. They have to go up there and they have to wash it down and clean it. And quite a bit of the plaster is starting to come off the dome. And we have to scrape that off and put new plaster on and repaint the whole thing. And I collected quite a few pieces of the plaster. And instead of throwing them away, I thought, this is Baba's Samadhi. Come on. And I got permission from Meru to take them home. And I said, I'll give them away to people, you know. And I gave them away to lots of people. So I had this plaster from the dome of the Samadhi. And this was maybe 2 years ago. I got this message from Baba. So I went down to the Moores Ford Bridge where they shot all those people. And I dug holes in each corner of the bridge and put some of Baba's plaster from his Samadhi in there and covered it and said the prayers. And then I went over across, took me 45 minutes or so to go across into Madison County and went to the Broad River and dug holes there where that massacre was and put some of Baba's Samadhi in there and covered it over and then said the prayers and stuff. And it was really weird because recently, maybe a couple of months ago, I don't live anywhere near these rivers anymore. And I decided I would go back to the Moores Ford one, which was near where our farm was, and say the prayers again. And so I parked my Jeep there, and I went to each corner and stuff, and I said all the prayers, and I look up, and there's this guy who's parked his car on the other side of the bridge, and he's out there and he's staring at me. And my car was over near his place. So and I start walking back there, and he's looking. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm actually just praying." He said, "Why? Why are you praying?" And I said, "Well, there was a massacre here many years ago, and I feel like I have a connection with it." He said, "What do you know about it?" And I said, "Well, you know, I've done a lot of research, and you know, blah blah blah." And he was from many counties away, and he had just bought the property, and he didn't know the story. And he's going, "Shit, I wonder if I should sell it as quick as possible." And anyway, it was kind of weird, but we talked for maybe an hour and stuff. And I told him of what prayers I'd done. It was Baba's prayers and everything like that. So anyway, I'm trying to look down through here, American Civil Rights High School. I think that's about it and everything, but it's interesting that, this is another thing about Pratima. I probably shouldn't tell you, but she was born HIV positive. And that's why we were able to get her. I was too old to adopt. No one would adopt her because she's going to die. Trudy is, or was, she's retired now, was a pediatric nurse. And she'd just gone to a pediatric AIDS conference. Mm. And she found out at the AIDS conference that only 35% of children born HIV positive actually have the virus. HIV positive means they take a blood test and you have the antibodies to fight the virus. Trudy's mother was 16 when she got pregnant, and she was thrown out on the street to die by her parents. And she got AIDS and stuff, and she was born in one of Mother Teresa's homes for unwed mothers and stuff in Nasik. And anyway, we knew that there's a good possibility of her not having the thing. And they were doing blood tests on her often, and the count, the blood count thing, the antibody count was going down, down, down. And we thought her system is telling her, hey, there's no virus here, so why are we creating these antibodies? But anyway, we think we know who she was in her past lifetime. And it could be total nonsense, but we think she was Peter's soul, who was one of the dancers. And there's lots of weird stuff. When we got her when she's 18 months old, she didn't speak any English. She'd never seen any white people before. And we took her down to Bombay to get her visa. She was on an Indian passport, and we had to go to the American consulate. Then we took her back up to Mehrabad. And she's 2 years old, and we get there about 2 o'clock in the afternoon at Lower Mehrabad, and my daughter Amy carries her up the hill to the Samadhi, and there's not many people there because everyone's off at lunch. And she put Pratima down on the ground. Pratima immediately walked to the door of the Samadhi by herself, walked in there, went to the foot of Baba's tomb, got down on her knees and bowed down. She's 18 months old. And we're going, oh shit, she's been here before. And then when she was just turned 2, we went to the Southeast Gathering. This hadn't got anything to do with the Ku Klux Klan. We went to the Southeast Gathering, and Donald Mahler was one of the guests. And Donald and Peter were really close. And we were sitting down one evening in a sort of semicircle, maybe about 6 of us, drinking tea and talking. And Pratima was about 8, 10 feet away on the ground, on the carpet, playing with her dolls with her back to us. And Donald kept on staring at her. And finally he said, well, I wonder who she was in her past lifetime. She was probably Peter, because she's been totally ignoring me. And Pratima just turned around and went, and then turned back around, and he flipped out, and he started telling the stories about that Bob had given him a nickname, Donald Duck, but Peter didn't get one. And Peter was really jealous, and Donald would really rub it in that, oh, Bob gave me a nickname. Oh, he didn't give you one, did he? And so it came time, the gathering's over, and Donald was going around saying goodbye to people, and Trudy was holding Pratima, and Donald came up and said, hey, I'm leaving, going back to the airport. And Pratima just turns her head really as hard as she can to avoid looking at it. And I said, Pratima, you're being very rude, and Donald's come to say goodbye, and I'd like you to say goodbye. So she turns around and looks, goodbye, Donald. Duck. Her head back. And it flipped Donald out. And then we later heard that in 1962, when they went to India, to the East-West Gathering, Margaret was there, and so the dancers all got special time with Baba. And Donald tells us the story, and Baba said, does anyone have any questions? And Peter put up his hand and said, yes, Baba. And Baba said, what? He said, I want you to promise me in my next lifetime I'll be born in India. And Baba said, no, you have so much stuff to work out in America. You have tons of stuff. And he said, Baba, I'm tired of America. I want to be born in India near you. And Baba said, no, you've got all this American karma. You've got to be in America. Come on, Baba, you're God. You can do anything. And finally Baba said, okay, in your next lifetime, I'll promise you, you'll be born in India. And so she's born in India and shipped straight back. Baba only said you'll be born in India.
Yeah, right.
And the other day, when I say the other day, it was maybe months ago. She lives in Atlanta now, and we were talking. She said, "Dad, what the hell is going on?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I'm this American in this Indian body. I'm not an Indian. I got this Indian body." And I also realized that socially, she gravitates. She's not really interested in hanging out with women. She totally focuses on men. And I went, "Oh yeah, Peter did that too." And it was interesting that Peter died, I think, in 1990. And he was actually, of the dancers, he was my best friend and stuff. I used to hang out with him. And he died of AIDS. And here's Pratima, born HIV positive.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, and it's and it could be Baba's joke or something like that. But anyway, I have this daughter who's dark-skinned and everything, and there's been racial stuff, and there's never been racial stuff. Just to sort of finish this up, Baba's really putting me through a lot of crap right now. I mean, I feel like Baba's got this big stick and he's stirring up shit all over the world, and shit's coming to the surface, and he's got a stick and he's stirring up my shit too, and stuff's coming to the surface. I didn't think I had that, you know. And I'm in this lawsuit against this multi-millionaire doctor who has lost his license for selling drugs and stuff like that, and he's buying up all these. He owns more of Athens than anyone else. He's really mean, and anyway, he's trying to buy up all these condominiums, and we own 10 of them. 10 people live there, and you can only sell to him now, and the price he's giving us is nothing. You know, they're worth, say, 125,000, and he's telling us he'll give us 60, but no one else will buy them. And we heard that last Saturday, well, not last Saturday, because yesterday was last Saturday, he was involved in a very serious car wreck, and his head was split open, and he was unconscious, and they had to get an airplane to fly him down to Atlanta to go to the special hospital, and I'm hearing this, and here's this guy who's we're at war with. I'm hearing this, and I knew that Baba was standing there right next to me going, "Okay," and I went, "Yeah, I got to pray for him." And all the other people were going, "Good." And another thing that Baba's working on, he woke me up in the middle of the night. The guy's name is Fred Mormon, the doctor. He woke me up in the middle of the night about 3 in the morning, and I sat up in bed and had this conversation with Baba. Baba wasn't there physically, and I couldn't hear his voice, but I was wide awake, and Baba said, "I want you to try to love Fred Mormon." I go, "Okay." And he said, "Because I am in everybody, and until you find me in people like Fred Mormon, you'll never know who I am." I go, "Okay." And he said, "And if you were able to love Fred Mormon, what effect do you think it might have on him?" And I went, "I don't know." He said, "Do you think it might change him?" "I don't know." He said, "Because if you're doing it to change him, it's not love." Got me again!
Yeah.
And he did that too. He woke me up and told me I had to love Donald Trump. And he said, "That doesn't mean you have to go along with what he says and stuff." He said, "Until you find me in Donald Trump, you'll never know who I am." And it made me realize in one sense what an incredible gift Donald Trump is. That he's stirring up, you know, shit and stuff. And I think the world's getting crazier and crazier. But anyway, so that was my Ku Klux Klan story.
How did you end up in Georgia?
Well, I was a New Zealand hippie. When I finished, I actually did 1 year of high school in New Zealand. I grew up in England, and then we moved back to New Zealand because my father was from New Zealand. And I had to get into the University of New Zealand, I had to pass this exam called University Entrance. So I had to go to school for 1 year at high school there, and I got UE. And because I was accepted to all the universities of New Zealand, the University of Georgia, which is where I had relatives and stuff, I could get in, and I was actually the equivalent of a sophomore already. And then I went off to Australia and hitchhiked around Australia with my guitar and stuff, and then got on a ship, and then came to a freighter and came to America. And I'll tell one other weird story that it was a freighter and there were maybe 30 passengers on it. And our first stop was Tahiti. And we went ashore and stuff. There was another guy, an English guy who was my age, and went ashore, got really drunk and stuff like that. And anyway, this family got on board. The father was French. Tahiti's still a French colony. The father was French. The mother was Polynesian from Tahiti. Incredibly beautiful woman. They had 2 daughters, 16 and 17. I was 18. And they also had their grandmother, this tiny little lady who was born in the 1890s or something. She was like 4'5" tall, and she was a really grumpy little skinny woman. And I always tried to go and eat at their table so I could flirt with these 2 girls and stuff. And I got to be friends with them. They could speak English. And they told me that their grandmother was actually a princess from the Marquesa Islands, which were the next group of islands north of Tahiti, the Society Islands. And she was a princess. And as a little girl, she remembers the warriors getting in their war canoes and going off and raiding other islands and stuff. And they would come back with stuff that they had stolen, and they'd also bring back prisoners. And they would fatten them up, and then they'd eat them. So I'm probably the only person you know who sat down at the table and eaten with a cannibal. It's on my resume. So. But it was kind of weird to be sitting there watching them. Yeah, she's a cannibal.
I want to ask you, Charlie, you said that, I don't know which, well, you have a number of the Ku Klux Klan people that you got to know. And you said you wanted to know what made this man think the way he did. Did you get a little further on that?
Yeah. The Billy Couch, the Grand Dragon, I became friends with him, and I'd actually go over to his house, and we'd sit around in the kitchen and drink coffee, and we'd talk and stuff. And I was trying to get to know him. Why is he a Klansman? And what came up was that he was what's considered in Georgia poor white trash, and he comes from generations of that. And if you're that low on the ladder, you're always looking for someone who's lower. And one group that they picked out were black people and Jews, and that made him feel better that he wasn't the lowest of the low. And that's why he seemed to concentrate on them. And he had a horrible life that he owned a bulldozer, a small bulldozer, and he did bulldozing work. And I remember one time saying to him, you know, how's work going? He said, oh, they're putting in a development, 5 miles from here, and they've given me the job of putting in all the, the parking places and stuff like that, driveways. I said, good for you, Billy, good. And I went and saw him maybe a month later, and I said, how did the job go? And he said, oh, shit, they gave it to another person. And that's the story of his life, that he could never climb out of the hole. And his parents couldn't, and his grandparents couldn't. And one way of making them each feel better is to be superior to black people or something like that and threaten them, to have this power.
Being a bully.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm, like with Tom Fortson, I got to hang out with these guys and stuff. And I kind of wonder, maybe I've got all that crap inside of me. And in another lifetime, I'll be a Nazi or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I hope not. But you never
Maybe
know.
you already were.
I maybe already was, but at the same time, it was much easier for me to point my finger at this Grand Dragon and go, you're a piece of crap and stuff. And realizing that it's actually Baba playing that role. Baba's in everybody. And the Ku Klux Klansman doesn't realize that Baba's in all these black people too.
So you were already a Baba lover when you got there. How did you find out about Baba?
No, I wasn't a Baba lover until 1970. And this stuff with the, going to the Klan rally and saying the prayer of repentance, that was in the 1980s and stuff like that. But no, I was just a hippie and stuff like that. And we were into spirituality, which meant taking LSD and stuff like that. And after a couple of years, I realized that I wasn't getting anywhere. You know, that it opened up some ideas and stuff, but it was really nice because I was able to stop using all drugs, I think by 1989 or something like that. I even went down to Jamaica and lived on the beach in Jamaica, and everyone was smoking lots of dope and stuff like that. And I didn't have to do it, you know. It was nice just hanging out there.
Who was your Baba contact? Who told you about Baba?
I really don't know, because it was during the sort of, you know, the spirit, you know, psychedelic spirituality stuff, and he was one of the gurus that I found out about. And actually, there was a woman, because I'm in my 70s, I'm not good at names anymore, who had gone to the center, and she told me about him and stuff like that. And so in 1971, I went to the center, came to the center for the first time. And it was sort of interesting because I'd read, I think I'd read God Speaks. No, I hadn't read God, I read the Gard'ner, so I knew everything about Baba. I was an authority. And this was my first trip. And it was back when they only had the original kitchen. And I was in the original kitchen. And I walk outside, and there's this woman sitting on one of the benches all by herself. And, you know, and she's kind of looking out over the lake and stuff like that. And so I go up and say, hey, how you doing? You know, hello, how are you? And she said, oh, I'm fine, and everything. And I said, so do you know much about Mayor Baba? And she goes, well, I know some. I'm starting learning more and more. And I went, this is her lucky day. So I start explaining to her about Mayor Baba. And she, every now and again, she stopped and said, wait a minute, I didn't get that. Can you go back? And be very patient with her and stuff. And then we start talking about the plane. Or I start talking about the planes, explaining the planes to her and stuff. And she didn't get that at all. You know, she was kind of like going back and forth. And this went on for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then suddenly, Kathy Riley, what was her name? What does it used to be?
Haas.
What?
Haas.
Okay.
Kathy Haas.
She and a bunch of other Baba lovers came running up. J. Baba, Margaret. It was Margaret. And she looked up at me, and I realized, you know, because I knew the name, I didn't know who she was. She looked up at me like, you fucking idiot. I looked back at it, it was really kind of funny.
So, Charlie, I never thought that I would be, it must be our Georgia karma, but
In Georgia, it's pronounced Crammer.
our Georgia karma. But I never thought I'd be listening to and sharing stories of lynchings in the KKK with anyone in my life. But you mentioned how the poor white trash, how they became the KKK, and their hatred was toward the black people and the Jews. Well, growing up in Marietta, I was the only Jewish family, or one of the few, and we had a cross burned in our yard.
Yep.
But that was because my brother, my oldest brother, had to go heckle a KKK rally, and that was their payback. And so, and on the lynching end, in Marietta, we had the unfortunate story of Leo Frank,
Yeah.
who was a young Jewish factory manager who was hung in the late teens, early 20s. And, you know, I grew up under the tree, in essence. I knew where the tree was, where he was lynched. But fast forward to just about 10, 15 years ago, I get a call from one of my best friends from high school, and we've not talked in years, but she called up and she was absolutely hysterical, and she's saying, please forgive me, please forgive me. And I said, Ann, what are you talking about? She said, please forgive me. And I said, what's going on? And she said, she had just found out, it was in one of the recent histories that had been written, that her grandfather was one of the ringleaders that took Leo Frank out of the jail that he was in and brought him to Marietta and hung him. And then when I was in Emory, or just even before Emory, they had an orientation in Eagleton.
Yes.
And I don't know why, Emory, they had some kind of sort of semi-campus or campground there. And so I was going to that. Charles was there. And Warren Hicks was driving up to be part of it as well. And I remember Warren telling me, he stopped at a gas station. In those days we wore Baba buttons. You remember? And he had his Baba button. You know, Baba is the young Jesus looking Baba, but Baba's a darker complexion in that photo. And Warren's overheard one of the men in the gas station where they stopped saying, "That boy's wearing a picture of a nigger around his neck." So that was, you know, in 1969, 1970.
I remember going with Trudy to, her father had a house on Hilton Head Island. And I had long hair and stuff, and Trudy and I were driving down there, and we were out in the country somewhere, like, you know, country road, and we had to pull over for gas. And back in those days, you know, you didn't fill up your car yourself. The guy came out.
Right.
And
The truly old days.
Yeah. And we paid him and everything, and I realized I had to go to the bathroom. And I saw that the bathroom was around the back, so I went around the back, and it was locked. So I came up to the guy and filled it, the guy who owned the gas station, and I said, "Hey, can I get the key to the men's bathroom?" He said, "No, you can't use the men's bathroom." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "You're a fucking queer." And I said, "I'm not a queer." He said, "Well, look at you." And I said, "This is my girlfriend. I'm not gay." And he said, "Get out of here, you fucking queer." And so we just got in the car. And so that was a little bit of discrimination. But once again, I could have cut my hair and come back again, "Yes, sir, what do you want?" and stuff. And a black person can't do that. And,
Charlie, I have another sort of KKK story. When I was a kid, I loved Jesus very much. And then due to circumstances beyond my control, I began to hate God and everything about it. And I'd gone to junior college in town, in Trenton, and my dad gave me money to go away to college for a year. And I looked at some colleges. I got accepted to them all, but I chose one in Tennessee, Maryville College. It was a Christian college because I wanted to get back the love of Christ that I'd had as a little child. So I went to this Christian college where they burned a cross out front. They had a Catholic student that they discriminated against terribly. They did all sorts of things, including kicking me out on trumped-up charges, because we weren't allowed to ride in cars, so I rode around on the bumper of a truck and beep the horn when we went by the president's office and stuff. But this is a Christian college, and they were awful. This was earlier, this was in 57, 58.
So my friend Ann, who I was saying called me, went to Maryville College.
Did she really?
only Baba could come up with stuff like this.
Because that's the college I got kicked out of, to burn the cross. Oh, so this was going on all over the place.
I think that just from, I'm involved with the civil rights movement thing in Athens and stuff, that, and listening to the news and stuff, I think it's getting worse now. That there's more people. There was just a big Klan rally down in Union, Georgia, south of Atlanta, a month ago or something like that. And they're getting together more, and a lot of more people are, who had been sort of hanging back, are feeling like they need to get involved. And not just the Klan, but for fascist groups and stuff.
Yeah.
And
everybody's unsettled. Baba's just doing this to everyone, and if they don't have something like Baba to hold on to, it's hard.
It's true.
Baba had a Baba lover who was formerly a Klansman in Greensboro. I met the gentleman, his name was Herbert Lewis. If you were to Google him, I think you'd find one sentence to him in a book about right-wing preachers. But back in the day, he lived in New York, and he was interested in metaphysics, all kinds of things, Rosicrucianism, theosophy, and he had a buddy that was interested in the same things, and they would go to Narina's lectures. And in fact, he was quite astounded at the lectures because he would come out and they'd shake Narina's hand on the way out, and they would feel an electrical thrill. And they were suggesting to each other that perhaps she had an electric buzzer or something. But many, many years passed, and he became a really, really, I guess, kind of helpless. He might have had a stroke or something, but he was filthy. He was just disheveled, looked like a bum. He was just living on a kind of a fixed income from his father's trust, and lived in a absolutely filthy house. And oddly enough, I found out about him because when I was first visiting down here at the center in the early years, which were in the 70s, Elizabeth Patterson asked me to look up Herb Lewis in Greensboro, which I tried to do and didn't. He wasn't in the phone directory. I sort of was slack. I didn't pursue it. But I asked around, and somebody told me there is a Herb Lewis. He hangs out at the public library. So, and they described him. He wasn't hard to spot. He's sitting there in the library, bored to death, all sort of slumped over. And I come up to him. I'm in my 20s at this time. I say, "Excuse me, are you Herb Lewis?" "Who wants to know?" I said, "Well, I'm Bob Underwood, and we've got a Mayor Baba group that meets over at the university. And we wondered if you would be interested in coming to some of our meetings." And he said, "Mayor Baba? Mayor Baba? Oh, Mayor Baba! Yes, take me to lunch." So I took him to lunch, and he told the story of his.
Wow. That's incredible.
He had been in the Klan.
Well, that also reminds me, and I've got a lot of stuff written down here, and I can't make head or tail of it. But about Baba, that when he came to visit America to the center and stuff, and he'd be sitting in a chair, and if a black person came in, Baba would stand. And he wouldn't stand if I came in there, but a black person. Okay, that to me is significant. What significance it is, I don't know. Also, the stories about him peeing in the bathrooms and the airport and stuff, that he peed in both the coloreds only and the whites only and stuff like that. And then in 1952, when they were going across country and they would have to stop at motels and stuff, Dr. Nilu was with him, and he couldn't go into these hotels. He had to go sleep because he was very dark-skinned. And just, to me, it's just Baba doing stuff, and what the heck do I know? But I think it's significant.
And I brought him to the center several times.
Good for you.
And introduced him to Elizabeth. But there wasn't much interaction.
Yeah.
She had asked for him. And
How did
he
she
had
know?
known Darwin Shaw, he had known Narina, he had known Elizabeth, and I don't know who else he knew. But it was kind of formal, polite pleasantries exchanged. There wasn't any, if there was anything more than that, I didn't know. And she was, thank you, she was glad for him to come. And came several times.
Well, it's not quite the same thing, but it might be in the same vein, but German prisoners of war actually worked on the center. They built the road down to the beach.
Really?
They cut the road into the
Jay
beach.
Baba.
And they started actually the first forest fire that we know of. By accident, one was just smoking.
We just, when I say we, the civil rights people in Athens a couple of years ago kind of closed down this bar in downtown Athens, which was primarily for students. But we have more bars in Athens than we have whatever. It's all, and it was General Beauregard's bar. And it had a Confederate flag hanging outside of it and stuff like that. And they had a drink there called a niggerita, instead of a margarita and stuff like that. And a group of people got together and stood outside and formed a barricade so people couldn't go in and out of there. And they finally closed it down. But that was just like a couple of years ago, and I'm going, wait a minute, this is still going on. And I see a lot of fraternity boys now at the University of Georgia wearing Confederate flag shirts and stuff like that. And so I think it's kind of coming back.
Well, but the interesting thing is that even looking politically or what is ever happening today, there's a lot, just in the world, as you said, there's a lot happening in the world right now. But to find the elements in ourselves, the Ku Klux Klan person in us, it may not be the Ku Klux, but when we're not acting in love, as Marianne Williamson said, we're either going in the direction of fear or we go in the direction of love. And every single person has both of those. We're not pure love, so therefore there's acts of prejudice in us always. You know, it just takes different shapes. And it's good to review ourselves.
Yeah, I'm prejudiced against the Klan because they're prejudiced against other people.
No, it's a cycle like that, yeah.
I just don't wear a robe.
Yeah.
Because I'm a lot more sophisticated than them, you know. So.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Stay by. Just real quick, about all this stuff that's going on in my life and everything. I went to India. This is I don't know how many years ago, and I got out there out to Mirzad before anybody else, and Erich was standing there all alone, and we went up and I hugged him and stuff, and he was kind of like when we would hug, he was like he was my big brother. And we'd hug, and he'd kiss me on the cheek, and I'd kiss him on the cheek. And as we were parting ways, he'd punch me in the stomach and try to throw me on the ground. And I loved it. It was stupid guy stuff. Anyway, I got out there, and he said, he looked at me and said, "Charlie?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "How long has it been?" And I said, "I don't know, 4 years." And he said, "Come on, sit down." There was no one else there. And we sat down, and he said, "So tell me, how's it been?" I said, "You really want to know?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "It's been one load of shit after another." And he just grabs me and he goes, "Great, great." What do you mean, great? He said, "If everything's going fine in your life, then Baba's not working with you." He said, "You're just going to sit on this bench and not move." So he's really pushing me off the bench right now.